dark skies, neon planets, and the eerie hum of futuristic machines, Italy's 1970s cinema dared to show worlds Hollywood wouldn't touch. But with daring came danger. Some films were banned, others mocked, yet all left scars on audiences who witnessed them. Were these masterpieces of vision or forbidden experiments meant to be forgotten? Tonight, we uncover 12 shocking Italian sci-fi films that haunted viewers forever. Number 12. Planet of the Vampires, 1971 re-release boom. Though originally released in 1965, Planet of the Vampires shocked audiences again in the 1970s, when Italian distributors re-released it to cash in on the space race frenzy and post-2001, a space odyssey wave. Suddenly, a film once dismissed as pulp became an eerie mirror to mankind's growing fears about space exploration. The premise was simple but haunting. Two ships land on a desolate planet, their crews lured by an invisible force. Soon, the astronauts turn against each other, their bodies possessed by parasitic beings that resurrect the dead. Mario Bava's color-saturated direction, fog, red skies, and shadows that felt alive, gave the film a nightmare quality. But controversy followed. The Catholic Church condemned its unholy imagery of the dead rising in space. Some censors in Europe trimmed entire sequences, claiming audiences would faint at the suggestion of corpses piloting spaceships. In Italy, small-town theaters even banned it, after whispers that the story mocked resurrection itself. Behind the scenes, Bava struggled with a minuscule budget. He built alien landscapes with painted backdrops and smoke machines, recycling costumes from other productions. What looked lavish on screen was stitched together with desperation. Critics initially scoffed at the cheap effects, but when audiences revisited it in the 70s, they found the limitations only made it creepier. Its legacy. Many film historians now argue Ridley Scott's Alien drew inspiration from Bava's imagery: spacesuits, derelict ships, and the slow dread of isolation. Though denied recognition in his lifetime, Bava's work resurfaced decades later as essential to sci-fi horror. When the fog clears, Planet of the Vampires stands not as camp, but as prophecy. A story about possession, control, and the unknown hunger that waits beyond our stars. Number 11. Battle of the Worlds, 1972, television revival. Antonio Margheriti's Battle of the Worlds was an oddity. Originally shot in the early 60s, its revival in the 1970s television circuit turned it into a cult lightning bolt. Audiences expecting light adventure instead found themselves stunned by a dark, cerebral story of cosmic dread. The film opens with a mysterious rogue planet hurtling toward Earth. Scientists panic, governments scramble, but one eccentric professor claims the planet is not a natural body, it's a gigantic machine. What follows is a tale of mankind confronting a lifeless intelligence that sees us as nothing more than insects. Italian censors in 1961 had dismissed it as too strange for wide release. But in the 1970s, during a climate of Cold War paranoia and growing distrust of authority, its ideas struck deep. Viewers whispered that it wasn't really about aliens at all, but about global powers treating citizens as expendable. Behind the scenes, Margheriti was obsessed with scale. He used miniature models, suspended planets over mirrors, and layered effects to simulate cosmic collisions. Though crude by modern standards, his illusions created a sense of grandeur unmatched in European sci-fi at the time. Television stations received complaints. Parents claimed the imagery of burning cities terrified children. Some critics derided it as nihilistic. Yet young cinephiles saw through its flaws, praising its ambition. In fact, Battle of the Worlds became a midnight movie staple, with university crowds debating its hidden political meanings. Its legacy lingers. Today, the film is studied as one of the earliest European attempts to fuse philosophy with science fiction spectacle. The idea of an indifferent machine planet foreshadowed later masterpieces like Solaris and even Star Trek. The motion picture. The shock of Battle of the Worlds lies not in explosions, but in its chilling message. Humanity may not matter at all in the endless void. Number 10. War Between the Planets, 1970. Released at the dawn of a new decade, Margheriti's War Between the Planets was infamous for leaving audiences unsettled and confused. Marketed as pure space adventure, What they got instead was a surreal vision of natural disaster and cosmic collapse. The story begins with Earth's orbit destabilizing after a mysterious force field surrounds the planet. Scientists scramble to solve the crisis, while astronauts are sent on a desperate mission to find the source. The closer they come, the more reality seems to unravel. Time bends, matter dissolves, and even their own sanity begins to crack. When it premiered, many Italian theaters pulled the film after just a few days. Audiences complained it was too disturbing, with imagery of cities crumbling and oceans boiling over. Critics accused Margheriti of exploiting Cold War nuclear fears, though others praised him for capturing the unease of an unstable world. The controversy deepened when censors trimmed sequences of mass death, fearing panic. Some reels were destroyed altogether, leading to decades of incomplete versions circulating in bootleg form. Rumors spread that Margheriti himself wanted it buried, embarrassed by its bleakness. Behind the scenes, production was chaotic. Margheriti worked with a skeleton budget, relying on practical effects, painted skies, swirling liquids filmed in close-up to mimic collapsing matter, and endless smoke machines. Cast members admitted they often didn't understand the plot, performing against backdrops of chaos with little direction. Yet, for those who saw it, the imagery was unforgettable. A planet tearing itself apart, astronauts floating into nothingness, humanity screaming into the void. It was less a film, more a nightmare. In later decades, cult critics rescued War Between the Planets from obscurity. They argued it wasn't a failure, but an avant-garde vision disguised as pulp. Today, it's studied as an example of Italy's fearless willingness to experiment in genre cinema. Its lasting impact? The reminder that sometimes the greatest terror isn't war, but the collapse of the very world beneath our feet. Number 9. The Green Slime, Italian-Japanese co-production, 1970s European release. Though technically a Japanese-American production, The Green Slime became an Italian cult obsession in the 1970s after being heavily distributed on late-night European television. What looked like a standard space adventure turned into one of the strangest, most terrifying sci-fi experiences audiences had ever seen. The story begins with astronauts destroying an asteroid threatening Earth. But in the process, they bring back a strange green substance that mutates into one-eyed, tentacled creatures. Soon, a space station becomes a claustrophobic war zone. What unsettled Italian audiences wasn't just the monsters. It was the way the creatures seemed to represent the uncontrollable spread of contamination, an allegory that felt chilling in an era obsessed with environmental disasters and Cold War fallout. Censorship struck almost immediately. Some broadcasts cut sequences of the monsters multiplying, claiming it was too grotesque for family television. Whispers emerged that the slime creatures were metaphors for radiation poisoning, which struck too close to home during anti-nuclear protests sweeping Europe. Parents lodged complaints, demanding it be banned from children's programming. Behind the scenes, production was chaotic. Shot at Toei Studios in Japan, but marketed heavily across Italy. The cast of Americans, Italians, and Japanese actors often struggled with communication. Special effects crews worked around the clock to create rubber suit monsters that, while laughable to some, terrified unprepared late-night viewers. By the mid-70s, The Green Slime had become infamous. Bootleg Vibe HS. Copies circulated among students who treated it like a forbidden text. Critics later derided it as camp, but cult fans insisted it was a masterpiece of eco-horror disguised as pulp. The legacy endures. Decades later, film scholars now credit The Green Slime with influencing later works like Alien and The Thing, proving that beneath its rubber suits and flashing lights lay a deep unease about contamination, infection, and mankind's arrogance in space. The true shock of The Green Slime wasn't the monsters, it was the reflection of our own reckless footprint in the universe. Number 8. Cosmos, War of the Planets, 1977. When Luigi Cozzi, later famous for cult hits like Star Crash, unleashed Cosmos, War of the Planets, audiences weren't prepared. Marketed as a thrilling Italian answer to Star Wars, what they got instead was something stranger, darker, and far more unsettling. The film follows a group of astronauts investigating mysterious signals from space. What begins as a routine mission devolves into chaos as they uncover a machine intelligence that enslaves minds and drains life from those who resist. Unlike Star Wars, this wasn't adventure. It was paranoia wrapped in flashing lights and strange soundscapes. Controversy followed quickly. Some critics accused Cozzi of plagiarism, claiming the film recycled tropes from American hits. But Italian audiences felt disturbed by something deeper: the idea of technology controlling humanity. With computerization on the rise in the 1970s, the film tapped into fears of a future where machines dominated man. Behind the scenes, production was frantic. Cozzi had almost no budget, reusing sets from earlier productions and relying on creative editing tricks to simulate cosmic battles. Actors admitted they often didn't understand the script, which mixed philosophy with pulp in a surreal way. Italian distributors, desperate to cash in on sci-fi fever, pushed it hard into theaters, only to watch as parents pulled children out in fear of its inhuman atmosphere. But cult audiences saved it. Midnight screenings erupted in debate, with students arguing whether the machine overlords were metaphors for fascism, capitalism, or the looming computer revolution. Today, Cosmos, War of the Planets, stands as one of Italy's boldest attempts to fuse philosophy and science fiction spectacle. Dismissed by critics, adored by cultists, it became proof that Italian sci-fi wasn't about copying Hollywood. It was about creating visions too strange, too daring, and too haunting for the mainstream. The shock was clear, a warning that the enemy may not come from the stars, but from the wires and machines we build ourselves. Number 7. Star Crash, 1978. When Star Wars exploded in 1977, Italy's answer came swiftly and dangerously. Luigi Cozzi's Star Crash was a kaleidoscope of bizarre visuals, campy performances, and cosmic madness. At first glance, it seemed like a playful knockoff. But when audiences sat down, they found something stranger, a fever dream that lingered like a haunting. The story follows Stella Star, a space outlaw who embarks on a mission to stop an evil count from unleashing a doomsday weapon. Along the way, she encounters Amazon warriors, giant robots, and galaxies that seemed more like hallucinations than star systems. Italian censors bristled. Some declared the film too chaotic. Others accused it of blasphemy for portraying gods and cosmic powers in irreverent ways. In France and Germany, entire sequences were cut, allegedly for being too frightening for younger audiences. Yet in Italy, teenagers lined up around the block, craving its colorful chaos. Behind the scenes, production was a battle. Cozzi admitted he was inspired more by pulp magazines and comic books than Star Wars. Models were built hastily, effects cobbled together, and dialogue often improvised. Caroline Munro starred in dazzling costumes, while a young David Hasselhoff appeared in one of his earliest roles. The result was a film so strange it couldn't be dismissed. Critics laughed, but audiences whispered. Some said it was prophetic, predicting a future where space wasn't about heroism, but about surrealism and survival. Bootleg copies circulated in America, making it a cult hit overseas. George Lucas might have had the blockbuster, but Cozzi had the nightmare that wouldn't fade. Decades later, Star Crash is celebrated as one of the ultimate cult classics. Its legacy lies not in perfection, but in audacity. Italy dared to reimagine the galaxy in its own anarchic image. The emotional shock of Star Crash was this: that space wasn't just adventure. It was chaos, color, and the terrifying realization that our imaginations might be too wild for reality itself. Number 6. The Humanoid, 1979. When Aldo Lado's The Humanoid hit theaters in 1979, it was marketed as Italy's ultimate answer to Star Wars. But what audiences encountered was far stranger, and, for many, unsettling. With Richard Kiel, the towering actor from James Bond, as the lead, it promised spectacle. What it delivered was a bizarre tale of human experimentation and cosmic tyranny. The story unfolds on the planet Metropolis, where an evil ruler plans to unleash a chemical capable of turning humans into mindless slaves. To enact his scheme, he corrupts a peaceful giant, Kiel, transforming him into a superpowered enforcer known as the Humanoid. Only a small band of rebels, including a telepathic child, stand in the way of planetary enslavement. Audiences expecting light adventure were horrified. The idea of forced transformation into obedient drones struck far too close to Cold War fears of brainwashing and chemical warfare. Some Italian regions banned screenings outright, declaring the film too frightening for minors. In France, critics accused it of psychological cruelty. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Producer-run interference demanded it resemble Star Wars, while director Aldo Lado wanted a darker philosophical edge. Cost overruns and rushed deadlines led to shoddy effects. But it was Keel's disturbing performance as a man stripped of free will that unsettled crowds most. Rumors spread that children cried in theaters and parents demanded refunds. Yet, in time, the Humanoid grew into a cult phenomenon. Bootlegs spread in the United States, with fans praising its eerie atmosphere and boldness. Today, it's studied less as a failed knockoff and more as a dystopian allegory about control, manipulation, and the terrifying fragility of human autonomy, the emotional wound it left. A reminder that the greatest danger in space may not be alien invaders, but losing the essence of who we are. Number 5, Bronx Warriors of the Year, 2000 and 1978 precursor. Long before dystopian futures became mainstream, Italian cinema dipped into the terrifying possibility of urban collapse with Bronx Warriors of the Year 2000. Though technically more post-apocalyptic than pure space opera, its sci-fi vision of a crumbling society shook audiences who recognized too much of their own world reflected back. Set in a decaying New York City of the near future, the film imagines gangs ruling the streets after governments collapse. The story follows a reluctant hero forced to navigate warring factions of mutants, cyborgs, and brutal warlords. Instead of futuristic spaceships, the terror came from concrete ruins, smoke-filled streets, and the realization that civilization had already lost. Audiences in 1978 were shocked. Italy had been gripped by political violence, the years of lead. To see a film predicting Western cities devolving into war zones felt less like fiction and more like prophecy. Censors initially restricted screenings, claiming it glamorized anarchy. Police unions in Rome protested, alleging it encouraged rebellion. Behind the scenes, production was guerrilla. Many sets were actual abandoned factories and demolished streets. Extras were pulled from local biker gangs, giving the film a raw, dangerous edge. Rumors circulated that real street fights broke out during filming, adding to its chaotic reputation. Critics trashed it as exploitative, but youth audiences latched onto its energy. By the early 1980s, it had achieved cult status, influencing the wave of post-apocalyptic films like Mad Max 2 and Escape from New York. Its legacy is clear. Bronx Warriors of the Year 2000 wasn't polished sci-fi. It was a primal scream, capturing the terror that society might collapse not from nuclear war, but from its own violence and corruption. Number 4, Mission Stardust, 1970s revival screenings. Based on the wildly popular German Perry Rhodan pulp novels, Mission Stardust was meant to launch Italy into the heart of international sci-fi. Released earlier in the decade, it resurfaced in the mid-1970s with new cuts and re-releases that shocked audiences with its strangeness and eerie undertones. The premise follows astronaut Perry Rhodan landing on the moon, only to discover a stranded alien ship. Its crew, suffering from a deadly illness, strike a bargain. If Earth can provide a cure, the aliens will share their technology. What begins as adventure spirals into paranoia, with shadowy governments and rival powers seeking to control the alien secret. Italian audiences were unsettled. In an era of real-world conspiracy theories and Cold War espionage, the idea of hidden technology and disease struck a nerve. Some theaters received complaints that the film spread unrest. Certain broadcasters censored medical imagery, fearing panic during an age when polio and new epidemics lingered in memory. Production was turbulent. The adaptation of a German pulp was seen as risky, and financing ran dry mid-shoot. Sets were repurposed from other films, and visual effects teams scrambled to portray futuristic ships with minimal resources. Critics slammed it as disjointed, but youth audiences found something eerie in its rough edges, something unpolished but raw. By the 1970s, its revival screenings drew cult crowds. students whispered about its hidden meanings, interpreting the alien disease as allegory for political corruption or nuclear fallout. Bootlegs circulated through Europe, keeping its reputation alive long after it faded from theaters. Today, Mission Stardust stands as an artifact of Italy's willingness to gamble on pulp dreams. Shocking in its time, its legacy lies in how it blurred the line between pulp adventure and conspiracy nightmare. Its haunting lesson: sometimes the most terrifying discoveries aren't monsters or machines, but the secrets our own governments might be hiding. Number 3. War of the Robots, 1978. By the late 1970s, Italian director Alfonso Brescia had carved out a niche for fast, chaotic sci-fi productions. War of the Robots was his most infamous attempt. Marketed as a galactic adventure, it quickly became one of the strangest and most shocking films of the decade. The story begins when alien forces kidnap two brilliant scientists from Earth. In desperation, a ragtag team of astronauts launches a rescue mission across the stars. But what they find isn't a heroic confrontation. It's a nightmare of enslaved civilizations ruled by machine overlords. Audiences went in expecting fun escapism. What they got instead were endless battles against armies of robotic soldiers, humans reduced to puppets, and a plot that spiraled into surreal paranoia. Italian critics condemned it as a cheap Star Wars imitation, but some viewers left shaken, claiming its imagery of mindless machine armies mirrored their own fears of technology advancing beyond control. Censorship struck in several countries. German distributors cut entire scenes of humans being strapped into machines, claiming they were too disturbing. In Italy, the Catholic press accused it of portraying humanity as soulless, mechanical husks. Behind the scenes, Brescia admitted he had just weeks to write, shoot, and edit the film, reusing props and models from his other space operas. Despite its roughness, War of the Robots developed a following. Midnight screenings became rowdy, with cult fans cheering for its excess. Later, scholars revisited it as a rare glimpse into Italian anxieties about industrialization and automation. Its legacy? Proof that even low-budget chaos can echo cultural fears. War of the Robots wasn't just pulp. It was a warning that humanity's war against its own creations had already begun. Number 2. Escape from Galaxy 3, 1977. On the surface, Escape from Galaxy 3 seemed like another disposable space opera, but when it hit Italian theaters in 1977, it shocked audiences with its bleak vision of exile and survival. Directed by Bito Albertini, the film disguised itself as a flashy Star Wars cash-in, only to confront viewers with something darker. The plot follows two royal escapees fleeing a galactic war. Their ship drifts across hostile star systems until they land on a primitive planet. There, they are forced to confront the fragility of civilization and the question of whether their advanced technology is a blessing or a curse. Audiences were unsettled by the film's tone. Instead of triumphant battles, Escape from Galaxy 3 offered quiet despair. Leaders stripped of power, civilizations collapsing, and technology failing in moments of desperation. Italian censors briefly restricted the film, claiming its hopeless message might depress younger audiences. Some theaters marketed it as family-friendly, only to face backlash when parents reported children leaving the cinema in tears. Behind the scenes, production was threadbare. Sets were reused from Albertini's earlier films, and much of the story was improvised. Cast members later admitted they barely understood the narrative, but this only added to its surreal, dreamlike quality. For years, it vanished into obscurity. Then, during the VHS boom of the 1980s, it resurfaced among collectors. Cult fans began debating its hidden meaning. Was it a parable about colonialism, a warning about nuclear annihilation, or simply a fever dream that slipped through the cracks of Italian cinema? The shock of Escape from Galaxy 3 wasn't its special effects or battles. It was the haunting silence of civilizations abandoned and heroes reduced to survivors, a whisper that even the brightest empires might fade into forgotten dust. Number 1. Message from Space, Italian distribution, 1978. Though originally a Japanese production, Message from Space became one of Italy's most shocking sci-fi sensations of the late 1970s. Distributed heavily across Europe, its imagery and tone struck Italian audiences in ways no one expected. The story is part myth, part science fiction. 8 chosen heroes must band together to save a dying world from a tyrannical empire. Unlike Star Wars, however, the tone is stranger, darker. Its world's decayed, its heroes fractured. For Italian audiences raised on polished Hollywood narratives, the film felt chaotic, even nightmarish. Controversy erupted when distributors marketed it as a children's adventure. Parents were horrified by scenes of planetary genocide, corpses drifting through space, and a villain who destroyed worlds with casual cruelty. Complaints flooded television stations when trailers aired, leading to censorship edits that trimmed some of its bleakest images. Behind the scenes, the film had been one of Japan's most expensive sci-fi productions, but its Italian release amplified its cult status. Students debated its themes as allegories for dictatorship and rebellion, comparing its visuals to Europe's own struggles with political oppression. By the 1980s, Message from Space had cemented itself as a cult classic across Italy. Bootlegs circulated in college dorms, and critics began to reevaluate it as more than pulp. Its imagery of burning skies and doomed civilizations stuck with viewers long after screenings ended. The shock wasn't in the space battles. It was in the unnerving realization that destiny doesn't always mean triumph. Sometimes it only means survival through fire and ashes. 12 Italian sci-fi films, some mocked, some banned, some forgotten. Yet each carried shockwaves that lingered long after the reels stopped spinning. They weren't just stories about space. They were warnings, mirrors, and dreams too dangerous for their time. Which one unsettled you most? Comment below, like, and subscribe. The galaxy's strangest secrets are only beginning.